everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Yevamot, for our last class in Masechet Yevamot, if you could believe it. I know you're going to be very sad that we're finishing, but that is exactly what we are going to be doing tonight. We have a lot to learn. We actually have two prakim to start and finish, and we are going to review Daf 114 through 122, and Be'ezrat Hashem finish this Masechet. So we are going to begin a story at the bottom of Daf 113, and it continues on to Daf 114, where Rav Yitzchak, the Gemara explains that he lost his keys, and the keys to open the Beit Midrash, the study hall, in the public domain. So if you remember Masechet Shabbat and Eruvin, when we discussed moving things in the public domain, he basically dropped his keys on Shabbat, and he doesn't know what to do because he needs to open up the shul or the Beit Midrash. So the sages told him, you know what, they're children playing on the road, so why, or children playing around, why don't you get the kids to play in that area, and if they find the keys, then they'll bring it to you. And here we're in the middle of a discussion, and it's going to continue today, on if the court needs to stop a minor from transgressing, from doing something that they're not supposed to do. Again, as we know, minors, right, children under 12 or 13, really aren't obligated to keep the mitzvot. On the other hand, we want to teach them what's right and what's wrong. So the question is, what's going on here? So if you're sensitive, right, it said they'll play and then they'll bring you the keys. So here the Gemara says, well, you have to be careful. You can't instruct the child to bring you the keys to do something wrong, but you can let him do it if that's what he's doing by himself. Or maybe there's a difference between rabbinic and biblical transgressions. And maybe if it's more serious, so then we do stop the child. From here, the Gemara goes on to discussing non-Jews, right? Can non-Jews transgress, right, or do activities on Shabbat that we are not allowed to do? So the Gemara tells us on 114 that a non-Jew, let's say, comes to extinguish a fire on Shabbat. So you don't tell him to extinguish it, but you don't stop him, right? Because the Gemara explains we aren't responsible for what a non-Jew does on Shabbat. But if a child comes, you need to stop the child from transgressing on Shabbat. Then the Gemara says, well, maybe only if the child knows that that's what his father wants him to do. But if he's doing it on his own, then maybe you can just let him do it. What about, and I think this is, very, I don't know how common, but I think pretty common, right? The child of religious parents goes to his grandparents' house. Now, the grandparents are not religious. Do you have to tell the child, make sure you don't eat anything, or make sure you don't do certain things on Shabbat, right? So do we have to stop them or not? So the Gemara says you don't have to stop them. Or maybe again, maybe when we're talking about something that's rabbinic, but if it's biblical, so then you do want to stop them because you want to, again, make a distinction between what's more severe and less severe. From here, the Gemara continues on our, I don't want to call it a tangent, but maybe away from our main topic. The Gemara says that a baby can nurse from a non-Jew or eat or nurse from a non-kosher animal. So again, we see that this baby is not, I guess you would call it keeping kosher. The Gemara says, however, when the child is older, they can't. But when the baby, it's what we call sakana. It's to, if the baby's health is, or the baby is in danger, we allow the baby to eat whatever the baby needs to eat. But again, if the baby is not in distress, then we do not let the baby eat. Okay, let's go back to if you remember last week, we were discussing two brothers. One was hearing, one was deaf mute. And so our next case is, again, these two brothers. One is hearing, one is deaf mute, and they're married to two hearing sisters. We said that if the hearing brother dies, so then we force the deaf mute to get divorced because, again, his wife, he's only married to his wife on a rabbinic level, but her sister is now um, um, attached to him. Remember, has a zikah to him because of yibum, and that's on a biblical level, and therefore he needs to do chalitza to that sister. But again, the end of this chapter, the Gemara tells us we do not have a proof if you need to stop a child from transgressing. Again, we saw numerous cases where sometimes you do have to stop the child and sometimes you don't, and therefore it's inconclusive. With that, we finish the 14th chapter, and now we're going to start the 15th chapter. We're going to go back to a topic that we've mentioned previously, and this is when the husband or goes abroad and there's testimony that he died, and we're going to construct numerous scenarios. So the first Mishnah tells us a wife and a husband go overseas, and interesting, here the Mishnah says, we know that they have a peaceful marriage and there's peace in the world. And we'll see what that means in a little bit, but they didn't go to a war-torn country. And then she comes back and she says, my husband died. She can then get remarried or do yibum, meaning we accept her testimony that the husband died. If they had a good marriage, but there was a war in the area that they went to, or the opposite, right? They were fighting all the time, but they went to a peaceful place, then we do not accept her testimony because we can say, she just ran away from the husband, and that's option number one. Or if there's a war, she might assume that the husband was killed, but we don't know for sure. And the Gemara is going to discuss the case in a minute. Rabbi Huda says that she's never believed unless she comes in a distraught way, right? She's crying, her clothing is torn. The sages say, no, we believe the woman no matter what in either of these cases, and we are always going to accept her testimony. Again, it is very important to understand, and I know, unfortunately, nowadays, the case of agunot, of women who are chained to their husbands, who are not giving them a get, a divorce, is such a terrible, terrible torment for these women. But it is important to understand that in the Gemara, the sages are trying to release this woman as much as they can, right? They're trying to be as lenient as possible. So much so, as I just mentioned, that the Mishnah says, we accept her testimony no matter what. In any case, if she comes and she says, she vows, or she's coming to testify before the court that her husband dies, we believe her. So it's just important to understand from the perspective of the Gemara, we do see the rabbis trying to be as lenient as possible. Okay, let's see the Gemara. So the Gemara says, if there's a war, again, what's the issue? Maybe she assumed that he was dead, right? Maybe he went to this place where there was a battle, or they came back and they said there were no survivors. But the Gemara says she doesn't really know for sure, and therefore we do not accept her testimony because she's not sure. She didn't see him die. And even if she saw him being attacked, if she didn't see him die, we do not accept the testimony. And from here, the Gemara says that not only war, right, we mentioned war, but even famine, or if a building collapsed on the person, if there's, snakes or scorpions or a plague, all of these things are extremely dangerous. However, and again, the Gemara is going to go through all of these crazy cases. If you didn't see him dead, you don't know, and maybe he survived all of these things. Daf 115 says that if she testifies that her husband died, but there was a war in the area that they were in, again, do we believe her? Because she ah she comes and testifies both of those facts, meaning the court didn't know that they went to Romania, they went to the Ukraine, and they didn't know the news, so the court didn't know that there was a war in Ukraine. When they come back, she says, "My husband died, and I want you to know that there was a war." Now, um, halachically, according to Jewish law, she didn't have to add the fact that there was a war. Now, the fact that she added it, right, because she didn't have to, it might prove that she's really telling the truth, meaning that she saw him die, even though she's also saying that there was a war. This, for those of you who learn Gemara, is called a migo. Migo is a term in the Gemara, which means that um, I made one statement and I didn't need to give you all of these details, right? I would have been, if if I was smart, I would have left some details out. The fact that I added all of these details might prove that I'm really telling the truth because, like, if I'm trying to trick you, I wouldn't have added all of these details that might get me in trouble. So again, the fact that she added that there was a war, maybe we believe her, or once she says there's a war, now we don't believe her. What if she says that there was a fire in the house? I survived, but he died. Again, we don't, it's the same idea. We don't accept her testimony because maybe he survived, right? You went out the front door, but maybe he went out the back door. Or, right, we were attacked by robbers. And again, like I survived and he didn't. Here it seems you are believed because it says that she would be saved and she would have seen that he was killed, and therefore that actually she is believed for that, or the testimony is accepted. There's a story again. Now there were a lot of stories in this chapter. I brought some of them. I didn't bring all of them, but so there's a story of a wife who escapes a burning house on her wedding night, and then they find a corpse with a severed hand. Lots of details. So then they say, "Oh, again," she says, "Oh, that's my husband." But the point is, they couldn't identify the body. So some say that we can rely on it being the body, being the husband, because it was in the house. Or some say no, maybe someone came to rescue the husband and he got trapped there, but the husband got out. So we don't know really what happened. What about can we rely on one witness to say that the husband died during wartime? Again, we want to be as lenient as possible. So now we have a few more stories, right? Two students drowned, and then it says that they allowed their wives to remarry on the testimony of a woman. Now here it's important, we got into it a little bit, but according to Jewish law, right, as we know, I think, we need two male witnesses in order to bring testimony. We learned in this Masechet that there are extenuating circumstances where we accept one witness. Wherever we accept one witness, we also accept the testimony of a woman, right? Because it is a leniency in testimony. So here, the Gemara says, well, these people died, by drowning, so that's like war. So then maybe one witness is enough because we know that a woman is okay to testify. Or maybe no, they actually saw the bodies and they were able to identify them with markers, right? What are called simanim, right? With distinguishing features or marks on their body, and then that would be acceptable testimony. And from here, the Gemara goes on to discuss. Accepting testimony based on these markings, right? If let's say I have a vessel and it says on it taf for truma, do I assume that there's truma in this vessel, Or can I say, oh, there used to be truma in the vessel, but maybe someone emptied it and put in regular food? Like, how do I understand markings? Maybe things were switched or not. So to here, with markings, do I accept these distinguishing features for a person? And the Gemara is going to discuss how we identify the husband, right? A person who dies. Okay, Daf 116. That the Gemara says that, like, again, when we talked about like food in a vessel, we say that right, really it could be that someone switched it, so we don't necessarily rely on the markings that we see on the vessel. Now, remember we said if there was fighting between them, we also don't accept her testimony, right? Because maybe she lost him somewhere in Europe and came back and says, oh, I guess he died. Oh, I want to get remarried or do yibum. So here the Gemara asks, what does that mean that they were fighting? Like, how do you define that? One answer is that she actually asked for a divorce. That would really show that she wants to get out of this marriage. If she says that she is divorced, then we believe her. What if, again, right, if he was the one who was argumentative, then, right, if he's the one who's always picking fights and now she comes back and she says he died, so we actually do accept her testimony. Again, we asked, what if there's one witness? How is one witness believed to testify that their marriage was rocky, right? That they were always fighting. And here the Gemara says, Teku, we're not sure what the answer is there. Okay, next Mishnah on 116. Beit Hillel say that we only accept a woman's testimony in court in the same area that the husband died. And you'll see here, we're going to discuss an interesting legal case. Basically, we're going to see in a minute that there was a specific incident. And here, Beit Hillel, right, the school of Hillel, is going to take this incident and say, the way we ruled in this incident, if we have an exactly mirrored case, we'll rule the same way. But if there are differences, so we're not going to rule the same way. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So Beit Hillel say that if the woman brings testimony in the same city that, again, let's say they were in the Ukraine, if she goes to a court in the Ukraine, so then we accept it, because here the idea is that the court can go and investigate it. But if it's out overseas or somewhere else, then we do not accept the testimony. Beit Shammai say, no, we accept it anywhere. And interestingly enough, right, usually Beit Hillel are more lenient. And here the Mishnah tells us that Beit Shammai actually convince Beit Hillel to change their mind, and they accept the Beit Shammai's opinion, which is the woman is accepted anywhere she goes to court. So now let's get to the Gemara. Beit Hillel, as I mentioned, was based on an incident. Beit Shammai say we don't limit to the parameters of that incident. Rather, we look at the case more broadly. It doesn't have to be exactly similar to the case that was brought originally. So again, right, the Beit Shammai say it doesn't have to be local. It can even be overseas, because we know that people do travel to different areas. So we can always get information from other areas, and therefore she wouldn't lie, and we accept her testimony. So what was the case? The case was that a man died by a snake bite during the wheat harvest. And from here, the rabbi said, we'll believe or we'll accept a woman's testimony about this case. So again, it was a local case, So Beit Hillel said, oh, therefore all cases need to be local. But again, Beit Shammai say, don't limit every case to these specific parameters. The same machloket, the same argument was applied to another case. And again, do we limit the details of the case or do we look at it more broadly? And again, Beit Shammai says more broadly, and Beit Hillel accept that as well. The next Mishnah, Beit Shammai say that she can get remarried and she gets her ktuva, right? She gets a ktuva. Again, based on a woman's testimony. Beit Hillel say that she can get married, but she does not get a ktuva. They say, like, we allow her to get married, but not in terms of the monetary aspect of the relationship. Daf 117 tells us, again, Beit Hillel say that the brothers don't inherit the estate based on her testimony. Again, all monetary issues are not waived, right? We say that we don't believe her testimony that much, or in terms of the monetary aspect, but we do allow her to get remarried. Beit Shammai argue that the Ketuvah itself says when you remarry, you can collect your Ketuvah money. So interestingly enough, again, Beit Hillel changed their mind and agree with Beit Shammai. Again, I think it's so beautiful. Definitely at the end of this Masechet, we saw a lot of arguments between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, and we're really finishing this Masechet with Beit Hillel agreeing with Beit Shammai. Okay, the Gemara says, if she does Yibum, the Yavam, meaning the brother, does inherit the deceased, meaning the husband who died, again, based on her testimony. If she comes to the court and asks to get remarried, she can get remarried and get her Ketuvah. But if she comes and says, I want my Ketuvah, so now she doesn't get her Ketuvah because we see that she is really focusing on the financial issue and not really focusing on the fact that she wants to get remarried. Okay, next Mishnah. Just it's always interesting. At the end of Masechet, we're going to get a lot of Mishnayot, one after the other. Next Mishnah. Okay, so we talked about a woman who can give testimony. However, the Mishnah tells us that everyone is believed except for people who are going to be upset if this woman will inherit the husband, meaning who might come to kind of mess up this woman. So those people are not believed. So who is that? So it's the mother-in-law, the daughter of the mother-in-law, the sister-in-law, the co-wife, or the husband's brother's wife, again, right, her Yavam's wife, and the stepdaughter, right? All of these people are not, we do not accept their testimony. Okay. However, what's interesting is, right, so we don't accept their testimony that the husband died, but they are believed to testify that the husband sent a get, right, the bill of the contract of divorce. They are believed about a divorce, but not about his death. So the question is why? One reason is given that the paper, right, you have a get. So having a get proves, right, there's a piece of paper to prove that he sent this piece of paper. But we'll see. The Gemara is going to discuss this. So the Gemara says, what about the daughter of the father-in-law? Maybe she's also not believed. We also add the wife of the father, right, like the stepmother and the daughter-in-law. Again, the question is like, who hates this wife? Which is just very sad, but unfortunately, the Gemara mentions a beautiful pasuk, right? Just like the water reflects, what it looks into it, so too a person reflects another person. Meaning, if the woman hates her mother-in-law, the mother-in-law might hate her back, right? Meaning generally the relationship is reciprocal. But it's interesting. It's interesting, or reciprocated. Sorry. But anyway, interesting. Um, so the Gemara continues. The next Mishnah, we said one witness says, okay, so let's say one witness says that he died, and then she gets married to somebody else, and then another witness comes and says he didn't die. We actually discussed this a few chapters ago, but here the Gemara says she does not need to leave the marriage. She can stay married because, again, it's one against one. It doesn't knock it out. What about, again, one witness? She gets remarried. Now two witnesses come. Now she has to get divorced because now it's two witnesses. Two witnesses are stronger than one. Just an interesting aside, three witnesses are not stronger than two, meaning once you get to two, the term is, shtaim kemea, meaning two is like 100. As long as it's, two or more, it doesn't matter. You might say, oh, five people came, then that must be more accepted. We don't say that. But between one and two, we do say, right? Because two is the proper number, one is a level down. Okay, two people come and say that he died. Then one comes and says that he didn't die. Interestingly, she can get married here, which is fascinating. So the Gemara says because she already got married, that's why she can stay married when it was one against one. But she can't get married afterwards. Like, let's say one person came and said he died, then let's say she doesn't get married, and then another one comes and says he didn't die. Now she can't get married because one against one, we're nervous. Okay. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we are going to again, one man. What about one man versus two women? Again, it's interesting. Maybe that one man it's seen as more because it's the man, or maybe because it's one man, that's less of a testimony against two women. It's generally seen as 50-50, and then again, we keep her on whatever status she is on. Okay, next Mishnah. A wife and a co-wife come back from abroad. One says the husband died, and the other says the husband didn't die. Okay, what do we do about that? So the one who said, and again, fascinating, he's either dead or he isn't, but it's interesting that the one who says he died, she can get remarried and get her ketuvah. The one who said he didn't die cannot get married and does not get a ketuvah. One says he died, and the other one says he was killed, right? So like similar but different. So now we have a contradiction. Therefore, no one can get remarried. Or do we say they can both get remarried because they both agree that he's dead? What about one witness said he died, and then one witness said he didn't die? She cannot get remarried, again, because it's one against one. One woman said he died. One woman said he didn't die, also cannot get married. The Gemara says, maybe the co-wife says he didn't die because she wants to mess up her co-wife, right, the other woman. And that's why, and we say no, we believe each woman to say, we believe whatever they're saying, which is, again, fascinating. Next Mishnah on 118, a wife says her husband died. Again, we say she can get married and get her ketuvah. Her co-wife cannot get married based on this testimony, because if you remember, we said that we do not accept the co-wife's testimony for the other co-wife. So one, as we mentioned, the first wife gets remarried, but the other one doesn't, so much so that if they were married to a Kohen, that co-wife continues to eat truma, right? We see her as totally married to the husband, even though to the other woman, we view it as if he died. So it's like, it's pretty crazy. Okay, the husband, so now, what if they testify that the husband died and then the father in law died? The woman can remarry, but the mother in law cannot remarry. Because if you remember, we said testimony of the daughter in law doesn't help the mother in law. Um, or maybe no, right? Maybe it can. The Gemara says again, as we mentioned, that the law is that the co-wife and the mother-in-law, we view them as still married, and they can even eat truma if they were married to to a kohen. Okay, next Mishnah. One man. Okay, crazy scenario. One man betroths one woman, but he they're now standing in a group of five women, and he doesn't remember which one he betrothed. Right? He doesn't remember which one it is. He needs to give a get to each one of the women, and then the ktuva money he can leave it in the middle of this group of women and walk away, right? And then they can fight over it. That's Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Akiva says, no, you need to give a get and ktuva money to every single woman because, that's not nice. The same thing if he stole something from one out of five people, he leaves the money in the middle, or he needs to give money to each one of them. Okay, there's like a machloket if he slept with this woman yet or not. But okay, next Mishnah. A man, a husband, a wife, and the son go abroad. Okay, so now we're going to learn two concepts. Right, one concept. The concept is called chazaka. Chazaka means something that is presumed, right? So if a woman left, right, she went abroad with her husband and her son, she has a chazaka, right? She is presumed to have a husband and a son. If that status changes, we have to accept testimony for that status to change. But we assume that the way she left is the way she's coming back. Okay, so right, when she left with a son, which means the chazaka is that she does not need yibum because she had a son. And now she comes back and she says, my husband died and then my son died, right? So if that happened, right, when the husband died, the son was still around, she now does not need yibum, even though the son died after that. So the Mishnah tells us she can remarry, and she doesn't need yibum, right? Because again, she didn't need to say anything that the son died. She could have kept her mouth shut. But the fact that she says, "My husband died, and then my son died," we believe her that she's telling the truth. If she says, my son died and then my husband died, so we're not sure really what happened, and therefore she has to do chalitza just in case she was really obligated to do yibum or chalitza. Let's say she went overseas without a son. So now her chazaka is that she needs yibum, right? She didn't have a son when she left, so we assume she needs to do yibum. And then she says, I had a son, he died, and then my husband died, right? So again, she didn't have to add that information. So now we say, okay, she does yibum. My husband died, and then my son. So now, again, we don't accept the testimony, but she does do chalitza. What if she left without a brother-in-law, meaning her husband was an only child, and then she says, oh, my mother-in-law had another child, right? There was a yavam, a brother, and then that child died, and then my husband died, right? Or vice versa. Again, no yibum, because again, now there's no brother, so there's still no yibum. What if she left with a husband and a brother-in-law, and then she says, my husband died, and then the yavam died, right? His brother, or vice versa. We do not accept the testimony. Again, she can't testify. she can't testify about the Yavam, right, or about her sister. So she's not believed, or her testimony is not accepted in this case. Um, Okay. And here a very, very famous uh, Gemara statement at the bottom of Daf 18 is that a woman would always rather be married than unmarried. The Aramaic statement is tav lemetav tandu lemetav armalu, right? Meaning, for a woman, it's always better to sit together with another person than to sit by yourself. Meaning, we're always assuming that the woman wants to get married or remarried, and those are her interests. And that's why we're going to either believe or not believe her testimony, based on what what she is saying. And with that, we finish the 15th chapter. One more chapter to go. Okay, Daf 119. Similar cases. A man and the co-wife go abroad, and then they tell the wife that the husband died. She cannot remarry or do yibum because maybe the co-wife is pregnant, right? We don't know what's going on with this co-wife. What about if there's a mother-in-law overseas? You don't have to assume that maybe the mother-in-law gave birth to another child, and now you can do yibum. If we know that the mother-in-law was pregnant, then we can maybe assume that there is a yavam. And here, right again, the question is, what does it mean to assume? What do we assume? So the Gemara says, right, we look at rov, majority, right? Many women or most women can get pregnant and have children. So maybe that co-wife got pregnant, and therefore there's no yibum. But maybe we're concerned for a minority that maybe she didn't get pregnant, or maybe she got pregnant and she lost the child. So what are we when do we follow like what majority of people say or do? So the Gemara says maybe we only say that we follow the majority when it's right in front of us, right? The very famous case of the 9 stores, right? You live in a town, there are 10 butchers, 9 of them are kosher, right? And you find a piece of meat on the store, you could assume that that meat is kosher because it came out of, right, 9 out of 10 chances that it's kosher. But here, majority of women have children or pregnant. You can't really assume here, right? Maybe she didn't get pregnant. Maybe she's infertile. So we don't assume right away. Okay. The next Mishnah tells us 2 brothers, right? We haven't had our 2 brothers in a while. 2 brothers married 2 women. They're not sisters. Each woman says that their husband died, right? The 2 couples go on a vacation. The 2 women came back, and each woman says that her own husband died, right? Each one is believed for themselves, but not enough for the other one to do yibum, right? Because again, we said you can't testify for yibum. Let's say one has witnesses. One has witnesses. She cannot remarry, and the other one doesn't have witnesses. She can remarry. Again, we're basing it on her testimony. What if one of them has children? So then she doesn't need to do yibum, so she can marry whoever she wants. The other one, who doesn't have children, cannot marry whoever she wants, right? Maybe she has to do yibum, right? Let's say they did yibum, and then the yivamim, right? Those brothers die. They can't remarry, or maybe they can. So the Gemara says again, if they had witnesses and children, and other had neither, so both of them can remarry. Daf 120 tells us, again, right, that um, because she got married, the last case that they got married, they did yibum, so then the co-wife can also get married. Or maybe we don't accept that, and we don't accept the testimony of one wife for the other wife. Okay, next Mishnah. A witness. Ah, okay. So we've been talking about witnessing, right, or testifying that the husband died. What did they need to see? So the Mishnah tells us that the witness needs to see the face from the nose up, meaning the nose and the forehead. And even if the person saw other birthmarks, they have to see the face. Um, and they have to see that he really died. Like you can't see like a sword going into his body, or even him lying on the battlefield, because you never know. Maybe he healed, or maybe someone saved him, right? You need to see him dead. And it has to be within 3 days of the death, because later the body is unrecognizable. Or maybe it depends on the person and the climate. Okay, so the Gemara explains you have to see the full face, and there's a whole story about a man like disguising his face, like his nose and his like forehead, and people didn't recognize him, right? So the point is, you could wear the same clothes, but if you didn't see the face, it doesn't count as good testimony. What about a birthmark? Is it acceptable or not? Some people say yes. Other people say, maybe they change after death, and therefore that's not enough of a siman, of a sign. Right? You can't testify, oh, he was wearing a black shirt and blue pants, right? Maybe he lent his clothing to somebody else, right? He was carrying the same bag. Maybe he lent it to somebody else. I saw him I saw him hanging from a tree. No, because maybe someone cut him down, right? I saw him with this mortal wound. No, maybe he healed. Um, and I saw a wild animal eating him. So just fascinatingly, right, the Gemara says, if you see a lion eating his leg, so that doesn't mean he died. Like maybe he just ate his leg and then let him live, right? If you see him eating his head, so then we assume he died. Daf 121. If a person right? So like, let's say a person cut someone's neck, by accident, let's say, but that person isn't necessarily seen as needing to go to the Ir Miklat, to the city where they run away to save themselves, because again, maybe something else brought upon his death quicker, which is an interesting way of seeing death. But again, people testified about bodies found in water after 3 days, and they were accepted because it seems that water preserves a body. I didn't look it up if that's true, but here the Gemara says that, Aliza is saying it's not true. Okay, interesting. The Gemara seems to say that it is, but again, it depends maybe on the wound or what exactly is the issue. Okay, some stories. The Mishnah tells us, right? Once upon a time, but really, like these are stories that they're talking about, right? A man fell into water and he disappeared. A wife, right? If a man falls into water and disappears, the wife cannot remarry because maybe he survived, right? Maybe he's floating somewhere. Maybe he went to another shore. And here the Gemara describes, or the Mishnah tells us about two types of bodies of water. One that has an end, meaning you can see all the shores, right? So if it's a pond, right, and a person dies and you can see all the shores and you see that the person didn't wash up, so then we accept we say, okay, fine, he's probably dead. But if it's something larger, right, a big river or an ocean, you never know. And the Gemara is going to bring us stories, right? The proof of a story of a man who returned after 3 days of falling into a water cistern. So it seems that, look, he survived. Who knows how, but he did. Or there's another story of a blind man who went into a mikvah, and again, he didn't return, and the sages allowed his wife to remarry. So we're going to have a lot of stories. A man was lowered into the water. I don't know why, but went to go get something, and when they pulled him up, only his leg came up. So the sages say that if the leg comes with his knee, meaning it got cut at the thigh, then we assume that he died because that he cannot recover from, and the wife can remarry. If it's only the bottom part of his leg, maybe he survived and she cannot remarry. Okay, the Gemara tells us, Rabbi Meir says it doesn't matter what type of water it is, she cannot remarry because maybe he survived. The sages say if it has an end, again, you can see the shores, she can remarry because we assume that he did not come ashore. The swamp seems to be like an endless water, meaning we don't know if he survived or not. And here there are lots of stories of men who they thought drowned, but it seems that he was like stuck in this underwater tunnel, and he comes out and actually he gets to his funeral because they think that he died, but really he didn't. A story of Rabbi Akiva, whose ship started to sink, and they thought he died. And in the end, he says, no, I was saved by a floating board. Rabbi Meir was also saved by these waves that brought him to shore. So all of these like miraculous stories. If you fall into lions, don't assume, right, if you see someone fall into the zoo by the lions. Lions don't necessarily eat unless they're hungry. So maybe he's still alive. But if he falls into a pit of snakes and scorpions, we probably assume that he died. If he falls into fire or hot oil, maybe we assume that he died. But if it's just boiling hot wine, maybe he survived. Again, like fascinating. Again, right, miraculous that man who survived the cistern. And then there's a story of the daughter of the well digger who also was saved after 3 hours of being in a cistern. Unfortunately, his son does die of thirst, but the daughter is saved. Okay, next Mishnah. We hear people speaking, right? This is not, till now we were discussing testifying, right? Someone comes to court and says, I want to testify that so-and-so died. Now we're going to talk about the case of people just talking to their friends. In Hebrew, it's Mesiach lefi tumam, means, you hear two women talking in the market. Oh my gosh, did you hear? So-and-so's husband was on a trip and totally died, and I can't believe it. Wow, I can't believe it. So if you hear this, then you can trust that as testimony because, again, they didn't come to court and make it official, so why would they lie or make something up? They're telling the truth. And again, the Mishnah says even if the person didn't have intention to give testimony, we believe them. And here it says, right, Jews with intent and non-Jews, again, with intent is not seen as testimony. And we'll see what that means in a minute. So the Gemara says, right, let's say they say, oh my gosh, I just came back from the funeral of, right, John Smith. Right, but wait, maybe it was, and here, fascinating, the Gemara says, maybe it was the grasshopper, right, meaning the pet, who they loved the person so much, they named the pet John Smith. So maybe they say, oh, we came back from the funeral, maybe it was the funeral of the pet. How do you know it was the funeral of the person? And they say, no. Right, they give details. Oh, and then this rabbi spoke, and then this person spoke. So obviously the person would not speak about the pet grasshopper, but they're actually talking about the person, and you can believe those details. Here, the Gemara talks about a non-Jew who's trying to get the wife to be able to remarry, so then we don't trust his testimony. But if he just mentioned something in passing, so then we accept it. And here there are a lot of stories of these non-Jews who are talking about things that happen and they let the wife remarry. Okay, last daf 122. Yes, excellent. Lynn mentions children. The same thing with children. Exactly. Okay, next Mishnah. You can testify that a man died even if you only saw him by lamplight or by moonlight, which is fascinating because we just talked about having to be very precise and seeing exactly. But it's interesting that I guess they're saying you know the person really well, so you saw him really well in moonlight, right, or just the lamplight. And women can remarry based on a bat kol. Okay, bat kol we really means like a, a, um, a voice. We usually use it in terms of a divine voice, right? We've seen it before that it's seen as like a type of like a message from God. It seems that in this Mishnah, that is not the case. It means that you hear someone talking, but you don't actually see the person. And the Gemara will give us examples. And there are stories that this was actually accepted. So like you're walking on a hike somewhere and you hear this voice from the mountain, right? Somebody shouted, again, John Smith just died, or I, John Smith, am dying, right? So we accept that even though we didn't see him, even though we don't see the person who's saying it. Again, as I mentioned, the rabbis are being extremely lenient here. This would not be okay in a regular court. But again, we don't want the woman to be messed up. Okay, next Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva went to Bavel. Again, Rabbi Akiva lived in Israel. He goes to Bavel in order to extend the year, to make it a leap year. And a man told him that he had a tradition from Rabban Gamliel Hazaken, meaning the elder Rabban Gamliel, that one witness can be acceptable for a woman to remarry. And if you remember, a few weeks ago, we had this machloket, and it was a minority opinion. One person said that that would be the case, that one witness is acceptable. Everyone else said it's not acceptable. And when Rabbi Akiva came back and told Rabban Gamliel, this is the grandson of the elder, then Rabban Gamliel was so happy, first of all, to get a tradition from his grandfather, and that he would be able to, again, allow the woman to remarry based on one witness. Again, they didn't want to allow it because it was a minority opinion, but because it was a tradition, now they were able to allow this testimony. Okay, our last Mishnah of the Masechet. There's a story of an innkeeper, of a woman who owns an inn, and they believed her that a man died because she brought out his belongings, right? She says, right, here are, his wallet and his staff, and this person died, and they accepted her testimony. And the Gemara says, first of all, she wasn't Jewish, and she was just talking. Remember, we said if it's a non-Jew, they have to just be talking in a conversation. So they accepted that testimony. And from here, there are other stories of testimony. And now a question comes up if you need to cross-examine these testimonies. Again, on one hand, in general, you cross-examine testimony. On the other hand, we want to be lenient. So the Gemara says again that we want to be as lenient as possible, and therefore maybe we do not do cross examinations for for this case, for a person who comes to testify that a woman can remarry, meaning that her husband died. And the Masechet ends with a beautiful idea, right? Because we discussed how the sages were trying to be lenient, we have the idea that, right, Talmidei Chachamim Marbim Shalom Ba'olam, meaning sages increase peace, right? Shalom, increase peace in the world, right? The rabbis are trying to be as lenient as possible to allow these women, to remarry, to do yibum, to do what they need to do. And with that, we say Hadran Alach Ha'isha Batra, meaning that's the name of the last chapter. Uslikala Masechet Yevamot, right? We will return Hadran Alach Masechet Yevamot. We will return to you Masechet Yevamot, maybe not too quickly, but maybe in 7.5 years we will return to this Masechet. But really, I'm so proud of all of you for sticking through. This was not an easy Masechet. It is actually, I think, probably the hardest Masechet in Shas. There were a lot of I think a lot of complicated ideas that we learned. And I will say that, especially as a woman, there were a lot of issues that came up that might have been difficult to learn about. And again, I really do want to end this Masechet by saying that it is important to understand that the rabbis really were trying to make it as easy as possible, or to protect women as much as possible. And again, I think in our modern lens, sometimes that's not so clear. But I think that if we try to put ourselves, maybe take ourselves back in time, it is important to understand that to protect a woman would be to make sure that she could be married, to make sure that she can do yibum, right? We want to make sure that she could be protected. Remember, we talked about the deaf mute woman, or the insane woman, or a woman who doesn't have children. We want to make sure that these women are protected. So I think it is a beautiful way to start the section, the seder that's called Nashim, right? Our topic for the next few years is going to be about women and all aspects of women. And I think that, we began by seeing how the rabbis are trying to protect women. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we will continue. We'll talk about the Ketuvah. We'll talk about how there was a document, again, a marriage contract, again, that's there to protect the woman. And then later on, we'll talk about how a woman gets married, how a man and a woman get married, and how they can get divorced, and etc. So really, mazal tov to all of you. I really hope you are celebrating with your friends, with your family, and really, l'chaim to all of you. Mazal tov. And Be'ezrat Hashem, next week, we will start the next Masechet. I'll give an introduction, and we'll do the first few dapim. So wishing everyone a good night and a great week, and looking forward to continuing. So have a great week, everybody. Mazal tov.
Thank you, Rabbi.